All right, it is time for the Sunday Scrum. A G7 meeting is taking place in Germany. That's one of the discussions that we'll get to, as well as the Senate scandal that is taking place in Ottawa. Susan Riley is a freelance columnist. John Ibbotson is with the Globe and Mail, and the CBC's Rosemary Barton joins us as well. All three are in the nation's capital. Hello to you all. Rosie, welcome back. I mean, I know you've been working, but you haven't been with us for a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about the G7. Anything that is striking you today about where the Canadian government is standing, where the Prime Minister is standing on whether it's Ukraine or climate change versus some of the other leaders?
I mean, a couple of things. On Ukraine, this Prime Minister, obviously, you know, he didn't have to make that trip to Ukraine. He did that in part, I think, to symbolically sort of show yet again that Canada has taken a very firm position against Russia at a time when Ukraine's President, Petro Poroshenko, warned this week that he was concerned about a full-scale Russian invasion into Ukraine. I think the issue now becomes, for this government on Ukraine, what else can they do? And are they willing to go so far as to offer up defensive weapons, to arm Ukrainian troops if needed? Obviously, that'll be a major part of the conversation there, and Mr. Harper will want to push that part of the conversation. The part of the conversation he will not want to push is around climate. And that's something that both Angela Merkel and the French president are very engaged in, because they're trying to create some momentum before the climate change talks in Paris in December. And it's something that, as you know, the Prime Minister put out goals a couple of weeks ago, a month ago or so, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% before 2030. But it isn't a conversation that he particularly wants to have at that table, particularly given the pressure that people like Merkel will be trying to put on other nations to do something really substantial.
And John, what do you make of that? The Harper, well, not just Harper, it was also the Japanese Prime Minister resisting this call for a decarbonized world in this century.
Right. Well, it's not going to happen, and it's not important as far as the electorate is concerned, and this is an election year, so it is not surprising that Stephen Harper will mouth a few platitudes on global warming and then move on. But he knows that voters in Canada, frankly, voters around the world, talk a good game when asked about global warming, but when it comes down to will you pay higher taxes, will you add 10 cents a liter to the cost of gas, are you prepared to see job losses? Then they go no. And climate change can't truly effectively be combated short of carbon taxes, and carbon taxes cost jobs. And finally, we all know that nothing happens unless and until the United States Congress passes legislation to combat global warming. And the chances of Congress passing such legislation resemble that of a snowball in a globally warming hell. So there really isn't much likelihood that anything significant will be done. Still, there'll be a communique with some nice language on it, but nothing more than that.
Susan?
I think what John just said would have been convincing 2 years ago, but the world has moved on, and times have moved on, and I think he's completely wrong, not for the first time, that I think he's completely wrong. I think, on the contrary, I think Mr. Harper has a lot to lose. I think decarbonization is not a radical idea to most people. In fact, they're talking about it at the Petroleum Club in Calgary, with Rachel Notley, by the way. So I think, but, you know, we can't expect anything more from this Prime Minister. He's got fixed positions on various things. What interests me more is his constant hammering at the Ukraine. This, by the way, is part of the this is the remote part of the election campaign, right? Everything's the election campaign. I don't see what he gains by yet again condemning Putin and yet again standing up for Ukraine, especially when what he's offering is apparently is 10 extra police officers. I mean, the actual real contribution to the Ukrainian effort has been pretty small. The Ukrainians, as we know, want weapons from the West. Nobody's ready to step up and give them weapons, including Mr. Harper. I don't get how he's going to get any benefit out of this at all.
Let's continue that conversation. I know, Rosie, you want to say something, but let's listen to what the Prime Minister had to say about this in Ukraine.
Our position remains very clear. We do not accept the illegal invasion and annexation of Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine. In the case of defensive weaponry, in the case of weaponry generally, as you know, our position has been we're supplying a range of non-lethal military equipment. We would only go beyond that in concert with our allies.
All right, so Rosie, is that the Prime Minister saying, hey, rest of G7, hint, hint, United States, you want to supply some weapons? You want to make this a serious conflict that we're involved in? You give us the signal, we're right there.
Yeah, I think that's the exact right interpretation. They are waiting for others to get on board. Canada can't be the only one that's doing this, and if this is a coalition, Canada has to be going along with it. But as to Susan's point about what does Harper get out of this, I mean, yes, I think this isn't just about the Ukrainian diaspora in this country, which is significant. To me, this is about trying to portray himself again as someone who on the international stage can talk tough and act tough. And he's trying to create this counterpoint to his opponents, because, I mean, we do have to keep the framework of the election campaign in our head. And so if he can say, I talk tough to Putin, I talk tough to ISIS, and I'll take down any other bad guy on the international front, that's something that he has and can push that the other two guys just don't have because they haven't been in that position. So I think that bolsters him in some ways from, you may not like it, but it does bolster him from an international perspective.
Susan?
In terms of how he works.
No, I disagree. I get what Rosie's saying, but I think he's hammered that point into the ground. Everybody gets to that point. But basically the problem is that he's talking loudly and carrying a small stick. I mean, you don't have to be an international, a sophisticated analyst to recognize that his actions, Canada's contributions, do not match his words. So to my mind, it just looks like a show of bluster for the folks back home. I think we've seen it all before. I'm not sure. I don't think it's convincing at all. And I don't think it necessarily helps them.
All right, we're going to move on to the, I like this when you disagree sometimes. This is nice, it's fun. And you're not sitting next to each other. Uh-oh, fireworks are flying. Okay, let's talk about the Senate spending scandal. Certainly an unbelievable week. Lots of revelations about it. Now there are many more senators' expenses files that are being pushed over to the RCMP to investigate. We know about the top leadership of the Senate whose expenses are being looked into. And we finally got a response from the Prime Minister on this on his European trip. Let's listen to what he had to say yesterday.
The Senate is an independent body. The Senate is responsible for its own expenses, its own expense rules. The Senate itself commissioned the Auditor General's report, and the Senate is responsible for responding to that report. As you know, there are some serious cases of abuse that action is going to be taken on, and other less serious matters are going to be dealt with through an arbitration process.
John, what do you make of how the Prime Minister is handling this?
As well as he can, all things considered. Look, there is not a single Canadian, I would warrant, in this entire country who is thinking right now, I wasn't going to vote for Stephen Harper, but when I look at how he's handled the Senate, it inclines me to actually think about voting Conservative. This is a horrible issue for him. It's simply a question of limiting the damage. The good news this week for the Conservatives is that there are as many Liberals under investigation now as there are Conservatives. As somebody pointed out, if you count all the missing seats, about half of the Senate is under some form of investigation one way or another. This is not a good way to build your brand. But for the Conservatives, all you can do at this point is hope that the market has discounted the issue. In other words, that voters have made up their mind about how rotten and corrupt and irresponsible the Senate is, have assigned blame to the Conservatives for their role in making a bad situation worse, and are prepared to move on to other issues. And that's it. It's for Stephen Harper right now, when it comes to the Senate, it's mostly a question of survival.
Susan, what do you make of this? Does this
I heard they were calling in Sepp Blatter to sort the whole issue out, because he's between jobs, right? He's accustomed to corrupt institutions. No, kidding aside, I think that. I think John's right about the Prime Minister. There's not, he's going Senate? What Senate? I never heard of these guys. I don't think the opposition parties have been very much more convincing either. I think Thomas Mulcair is right that people would love to get rid of the Senate. I'm one of them. I think it's an absurd institution. But I also know that there's the constitutional bar for eliminating the Senate is set so high, as many people have said, it's just probably never going to happen. So I find his position a bit facile. The Liberals, as usual, are a bit muddy. It's hard to tell what to do. So even though Canadians are enraged and seized with the issue, I don't think they've heard a whole lot of coherent remedies coming from any of the parties.
What about the NDP? They say they're going to abolish it. I know it's complicated, but they've committed to it. Why not?
Because because the Constitution, everybody and their dog in the entire country has to agree. And there's always going to be some legislature or some part of the country that's going to say, wait a minute, this could be useful to us, you know. So it's simply, and Tom Mulcair is a very smart man. He knows this, and I think they're just playing to the lynch mob mentality of the crowd, of the country vis-a-vis the Senate.
All right, finally, before we go, remember Mike Duffy? Wow. You know, who would have thought that the Senate scandal, that Mike Duffy would actually be taking, at least this week, a back seat? But Rosie, where are we with Mike Duffy, and where are we going?
I couldn't even get on TV this week. But I was in that courtroom anyway. You know, I think that Tuesday is sort of a really important day for Mike Duffy. On Friday, when he left the courthouse, he cracked a smile, and he rarely does that. Not because he's so upset about where things are at, but because he's been told to keep his poker face on. He knows that when we see this Auditor General's report on Tuesday, if we see anything that looks remotely like anything that he did, his lawyer has another part of his argument handed to him by the Auditor General. And no, I'm not saying that, well, these guys did wrong things, so it's okay that I did wrong things is a good argument. I'm just saying that in terms of his case, it may help the case, and it may more particularly help his own reputation. Because if he's not the only guy that did something wrong, then, you know, he suddenly doesn't look like such a bad guy. So Tuesday is going to be a real important moment for him personally, and for his lawyer to see if he can work any of this into the courtroom. Just to get back to the auditor's report, I think that the one thing that is not so great about the way this has unfolded is we've managed to get so much information before the auditor's report has come out. So it sort of makes you paint everybody with one brush. And we know that all these cases are very, very different. So the devil will be in the details when we finally do see it.